It started with a warning, a cold, calculated threat from Moscow, one that could shift the war in Ukraine into something far more dangerous. The moment the US ships Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine, Russia says, will strike back. Even at the source, what happens next could change everything. The airwaves crackled with tension last week. Behind closed doors in Washington, a decision was being finalized, one that could alter the trajectory of a war already dragging into its fourth year. The US had greenlit plans to send long-range Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine, not just weapon symbols of power, precision, and escalation. And in Moscow, they heard it loud and clear. Kremlin officials didn't respond with vague rhetoric. They didn't mask their message in diplomatic language. They issued a direct threat. If the US goes through with this delivery, Russia will consider it a provocation of the highest order, one worthy of retaliation not just against Ukraine, but potentially against the very sites from which the missiles were launched. That means American ships, NATO bases, or worse, American soil. The Tomahawk cruise missile isn't just any weapon. With a range of over 1,500 kilometers and deadly accuracy, it can strike deep into enemy territory. Ukraine having that power changes the game. Suddenly, targets inside Russia aren't safe. Supply depots, command centers, even key infrastructure could be hit without warning. For Russia, that's unacceptable. And for Putin, already stretched thin on the battlefield and pressured at home, this new threat cuts deep. But the US isn't backing down. Officials argue that Ukraine has the right to defend itself with effective tools. And if those tools happen to level the playing field against a much larger aggressor, so be it. Still, the risk is undeniable. This is no longer a battle of tanks and trenches. This is now about red lines and who dares to cross them. Moscow says if Tomahawks are used to hit Russian territory, the response will be asymmetrical and immediate. Translated from Kremlin speak, that could mean cyber attacks, missile strikes, or a sudden uptick in hostilities in NATO-adjacent areas like the Baltic Sea. US military analysts warn this kind of tit-for-tat escalation is how regional wars turn global. You give Ukraine long-range weapons, Russia hits back harder, the West responds, and before long, you have NATO on high alert and nuclear-capable bombers circling again over Europe. Already, Russian state media has begun floating chilling language talk of Western launch platforms being legitimate targets. That includes US warships, airfields, and even allied bases in Europe. Some in Washington say it's just bluster, that Russia won't dare take on NATO directly, but others aren't so sure. They've seen how desperation drives unpredictable decisions. They remember how quickly Cold War standoffs nearly tipped into open conflict, and in the middle of it all, Ukraine, a country still under siege, cities still bombed, soldiers still dying daily. For them, Tomahawk missiles don't represent provocation, they represent survival. So the shipments may continue, quietly, carefully. With each one, the line between support and involvement blurs further. And if or when the first Tomahawk strikes a Russian target, the question won't be whether Ukraine can win. The question will be, how far is Russia willing to go to stop it? The war is no longer confined to borders. It's becoming a pressure cooker and the heat is rising. What comes next might not just redraw lines on a map. It might redefine what global warfare looks like in the modern era. Because sometimes, wars don't start with invasions. Sometimes, they start with decisions. And this one might have just been made.